notation. So we thought, well, let's think exponentially. And so we turned radix on its head and called ourselves Zyder, and that's the Zyder X there. So we have 9 people, 7 countries represented, and we said, okay, well, why don't we think bigger? You know, if we're being challenged to impact 1 billion people in 10 years, why don't we take it one step further and say, how do we affect 7 billion people, the world's population, in a positive way in 10 years? And so we looked at problem spaces. And for us, the answer became immediately obvious. We said, what is a problem space that is equally relevant whether you're in New York or Haiti? What is someone that affects anyone? What is something that affects anyone, anywhere, anytime? And we looked at emergency communications and disaster response. Specifically, we looked at how can we make response and communication times better. We looked at mass messaging and said, okay, well, the problems right now is that it's generic, it's failure prone, and it's slow. And if you look at examples here of systems, mass alerting systems, in places as advanced and developed as New York City and San Francisco, they're not specific to a citizen and their circumstances. What you see here is a Twitter message during a terrorist threat in May 2010. There was a bomb threat in Times Square. And they said, oh, there's an emergency situation, the roads are closed. Well, that didn't help anyone. What to do? How did they know what to do next and where to go next? Similarly, on the other side of the coast, there's an emergency alert that says, okay, there's a blizzard. Again, there is information but no directive. There needs to be context. So essentially what we asked is, what trends can we leverage? We've identified the problem space. In order to save lives, in order to help prevent injury and protect human life, we need to get to people faster, and we need to get to them in a way that's more specific to their circumstances. At the same time, we looked at the trends of social media and, as we talked about earlier, smartphones. They're incredibly powerful, pervasive devices, and if you looked at the stats, they're increasing on an exponential basis. So by the year 2015, there's projected to be something like 3.5 billion smartphones worldwide, and I suspect we're probably going to outpace that. When you look at social media, in 2007, Twitter had 100,000 users. There's people right now on Twitter who have more than 100,000 users. There are several, on the order of magnitude of several 100 million right now. Okay? So that's when we pieced together a problem space and our technology space and said, what if a smartphone could save your life in a crisis? And we created this system that allowed any citizen with a location-aware smartphone to receive information that was based on their circumstance, and they would know that it was coming from a trusted authority because the back end would be controlled by offices of emergency management and disaster response officials. So essentially, we empowered the authorities to visualize their entire area. So you can see up here, if you're, for example, the New York City Office of Emergency Management, you can visualize your area and say, hey, I want to let all these people within this zip code or this geographic location, or I even just want to touch the screen and outline a custom area. And I want to highlight that area, and then I want to send a specific message to these people. So taking it closer to home, what if, heaven forbid, there was a gunman on campus, in Quad? Those of us around Quad need to know, A, there's a dangerous life-threatening situation, B, we need to get the heck out of there. Or, for those of us who are more confined to the university hospital, which is still in the area, but not close enough to Quad to merit an evacuation response, need to know that there's something going on, but stay the heck away from Quad. So I think you can appreciate with an example that different populations have different needs in times of emergency. Okay? And so for your part, whoever in this room, whether you be an Android or an iOS or BlackBerry user, would get these alerts on your phone, would have access to the latest from your trusted authorities, and also have access to libraries of first aid kits, disaster preparation disaster preparation, libraries, embassy information, and the like. Okay? So I talked a little bit about what the command side does already, so we're just going to move on. And the reason I'm telling this to you is because it wasn't just a theoretical idea. It was something that we turned into a real-world solution. We piloted this in Maynard, Texas, are working on the second generation of our software right now. We talked with the White House. We were recognized as one of Inc. magazine's 100 brilliant companies, and that spurred us to see what we could do further and reach beyond. Okay, so the lesson from that is, there's several lessons, but I think one of the key things for us as a team is that we learned the importance of saying, hey, this is the big idea we have. Now let's break it down to steps. Let's be a little bit daring, and let's see how we can turn this into a real-world solution. Okay? All right. So I've kind of alluded to this peripherally throughout my entire talk, but now we're going to talk about concretely, what are the lessons? What does it take to change your mindset, to change your thinking, and to perhaps yourself become one of those game changers, one of the ones who's going to revolutionize the way we move or communicate or illuminate the world. Okay? So before I go into my take on lessons, just to see if anyone here has learned anything today, does anyone have any ideas or thoughts on what it takes to implement a new technology or to take a big idea and turn it into reality? Okay, that's fine. So we can, oh yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say something about Ford. As you said, indeed, he didn't invent the car. The car existed before, but he had the idea to implement the mass production of cars. And he once said something quite interesting. I'll paraphrase it. I don't remember exactly the quote, but he said, had I asked my customers, they would have requested a faster horse, because they don't know what a car is. They have no idea. They wouldn't be able to ask for a car. So the lesson here is that we have to think outside the box and not be stuck with our usual tools that we have around us if we want to create something that hopefully will change our world, so something disruptive. So the lesson is think out of the box and don't be afraid to present it, and people will adopt it basically and realize that indeed it's a life-changing technology.
That's brilliant. I think you covered at least 3 of my next 5 points in that comment. So I'll go into that. Okay. So the first thing you said is think outside the box. Don't let yourself be limited by ideas of what you think is conventional or what will be accepted. And we're actually going to have a lot more hands-on practical exercise with this next session. But lesson number 1 is if you can dream it, you can do it. Nothing's impossible. Maybe you might be limited by the laws of physics, but if you read the BBC, there's all this, every single day there's questions about whether the speed of light can actually be manipulated or not. Now, whether that's due to scientific error or not it remains to be seen, but the bottom line is don't let yourself be limited. Okay? All right. You also touched on this with the comment about Henry Ford. Henry Ford did not invent the automobile. He did, however, catalyze its ubiquity. He is responsible for putting cars within the reach of families, of the layperson. And we saw this also with the Thomas Edison example. He wasn't the first either to come up with the light bulb, but both these men said, how can I make it better? And this is actually something I want to challenge you to do for when you come back next time. We're going to get to it in a little bit, but since we're here, your homework assignment, I want you to take a pad of paper, a pencil, and even whether it's for an hour, whether it's half a day, whether it's for a day, I want you to walk around your campus, walk around your workplace, and ask yourself, what inefficiencies do I see in the system? How can I make it better? It seems like a banal or trivial exercise, but once you start thinking like this, everywhere you go, I guarantee you, you will start to see things that can be improved upon in slightly different ways, okay? Now, there's a picture of the Heinz ketchup bottle, and those of you who've been here on my talks before, Kim and Bill, you'll recognize my rant about the ketchup bottle. And it's not just ketchup bottles, it's shampoo bottles, it's relish. It just doesn't make sense to me. It fundamentally boggles my mind that a container, by the very nature of its design, will not allow you to access the full amount of product. And so I've long cited this as one of my examples of things that can be made better, but I just complained about it. I am happy to introduce an update to this rant with this little video here from a group at MIT. Okay, so here you see the conventional ketchup bottle. Okay, just shake it again, sticking to the inside of the bottle. It just doesn't make sense. So this group here at MIT said, well, it's just a materials problem, it's a cohesion problem. What if you design a new type of material that had little cohesion? And look at that. So I thought it was really funny that I always mention the ketchup bottle problem. Someone actually did something about it. The point is, wherever you go, even as you walk out of this classroom, even within this classroom, you'll notice, if you start asking yourself, you start questioning it, you'll find inefficiencies within the system that can be improved. So let's go back to the talk itself now. All right, so that's lesson 2. Okay. All right, so lesson 3. There are no problems, there are no crises. The reason we call things crises is because we just haven't come up with a solution to adequately manage it or to adequately control it yet. So during one of my favorite Simpsons episodes, Homer coins the term crisis-opportunity, because in every crisis, there's an opportunity to do things better. So that's why there's crisis-opportunities, but not necessarily problems, just something waiting to be solved, okay? And when you're faced with a problem, this sort of ties back to lesson number 1. Explore all avenues, explore all ideas, engage in thought experiments, and ask yourself, what if? What if we explored this problem or this avenue? And you'll see a whole bunch of seemingly unrelated objects here on this slide. But the reason they're there is these all represent early iterations of CiviGuard. So that's when we were first coming up with disaster response solutions, we thought, okay, let's attack every single problem that exists in disaster response today, whether it's triage in the field, whether it's having access to adequate medical know-how in the field and medical supplies, whether it's the problem of resource distribution. And so when we were first brainstorming, we thought, okay, well, we'll have unmanned drones deliver deliver supplies from above, and then we'll create an AI physician in a box that can offer medical advice based on symptoms and offer treatment advice. And then, well, this emergency communication seems to be a problem, so we're going to offer a smartphone solution that can solve that too. And the moral from this tale is that you have to brainstorm, start big, start broad, and then iterate. Don't let yourself be limited. And I want to plant the seed right now, because when you all come back on December 4th, we're actually going to turn that into reality, okay? All right. So how do you think beyond your current circumstances? How do you think in terms of beyond the box, as Mark was saying? Look for trends. Think exponentially. Think ahead of the curve. So the example I always like to cite is the communications example. So when we look at various forms of communication and how long they took to reach various audiences, it took the radio 38 years. That's longer than some of us have been alive. 38 years to reach 50 million people. Facebook that is now at nearly 1 billion users, probably beyond that, took only 2 years to reach 50 million people. So what does that show us? It shows us that times are changing, and they're not doing so in a linear fashion. Times are changing exponentially. And so for those of you who are a little bit newer to the concept of exponential thinking, try this experiment. Walk 32 steps linearly, and you'll probably end up halfway or most of the way across this room. So you take 1 step and 2 steps, and to increase to 32 steps, 1 more step each time. Okay. Now, what happens if you do this geometrically or exponentially? So you take 1 step, then 2 steps, and 4 steps, and 8 steps. You're going to be a lot further than this room, probably partway to the moon, by the time you're done taking all those 32 iterations of steps. Okay. So think in leaps and bounds. One of the other examples I like to cite, so during my time at Johnson Space Center, we got to take a tour of the facilities and got to see this room, this amazing room where they controlled the 1960s Apollo missions from. And it was a room this size with banks and banks of computers. And it was these computers that put men on the moon. And my favorite part of this fact is when we asked the tour guide, what is the processing power? What is the computing power of this room full of computers? They answer, about the same as it would take for us to point to an icon and open it on a regular desktop computer today. Isn't that mind-boggling? A room of computers put men on the moon when we have oodles, like amazing amounts more times that power in our cell phones today. So this ties back to exponential thinking, and those of you in the computer sphere will know of Moore's law inside out, with processing power doubling every set number of years. Okay, so we're nearing the end of this talk, okay? And this ties back to what we talked about in the very beginning and why I was so thrilled to see that we have so many people from business, management, science, research, medicine. It's all about the people, it's all about teams, and it's all about putting heads together. Anything is possible with the right set of people. And you'll learn, especially in the context of today's education, you'll hear time and time again, interdisciplinarity is key. And I say this because often if you look at innovations and where they came from, it doesn't come from someone delving head down, very focused into their own sphere. It comes from the cross bridges between disciplines. And so I encourage you in the time, once we're done this talk, in the time at the end of this lecture, to stick around and talk with each other. And if you don't have time today, that's fine. On December 4th, we're going to make you do it, so you won't have a choice. You're going to explore your strengths, your weaknesses, and figure out how your weaknesses can be held up or strengthened by someone else's knowledge and expertise. There's a reason that we're not all computer scientists or surgeons or doctors. It's because we have our own skill set to offer, but so do the people around us. And it's when you put those together, the things you can achieve are quite amazing. Okay? So, just to summarize my final pearls of wisdom, what is it that creates an environment of disruption and innovation? I usually have a list of about 30 points, and then I realize, let's just distill it down. So think big. Don't let yourself be limited by what's impossible or possible. That can come later. If you're hindering yourself from the start, you're kind of limiting yourself to begin with. Okay? Always ask yourself, what is suboptimal? How can I make it better? There are no problems, there's only solutions waiting to happen. Okay? Stay abreast of trends and technologies, and since we have some time left, we can talk about emerging trends in medicine and data. And never estimate the power of a solid, dedicated team. So I've iterated this several times throughout this talk, but I really want to plant the seed, because whether you come on December 4th or not, I want you to be thinking about this as you walk out the door. And at the very least, whether you engage in the homework assignment or not, whether you take a pad of paper and start thinking about inefficiencies, whether you come to the workshop or not, I want you to ask yourself, what is one thing you can do today that's totally outside the norm or the realm that you do, and what would happen if you took that first step towards doing that. Okay? All right, so yes?
Well, I just want to add something else in the list of these lessons. Perseverance.
Yes.
So if you believe in your idea, being stubborn actually helps. But if you believe in your idea, perseverance is very, very important to get it to where you want to get it. I'll give you an example. So you talked about Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison hired somebody to work with him, Nikola Tesla. And Nikola Tesla was working with Thomas Edison on these generators. And he had new ideas. He invented the alternative current that we use today. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be able to have electricity like we have today, because Thomas Edison was working on DC, and we would have had to have generators everywhere. He couldn't go beyond 30 kilometers, but thanks to Nikola Tesla, we have this current. And the interesting thing is that Edison didn't like Tesla at all, and he fired him. And Tesla continued, and he did his own experiments and created his own company. And thanks to his perseverance, we have what we have today. Unfortunately, you forget Tesla, but Tesla is extremely important in our lives today.
Absolutely. And for those of you who haven't had much exposure to Nikola Tesla, he's brilliant, and we owe a lot of the world around us to him today. And even just reading his Wikipedia article, it's a quick read, but it's fascinating what one individual has done. But thank you. That's a very, very relevant point. And tied to that is, why do you need to persevere? Because good ideas take a long time, and because you will fail. And actually, we're going to talk about that next time. Fail fast, fail often. Because as long as you're choosing to learn from something, asking yourself, how can I do this better? You will always continue to go up, progress to your goal, whether it's an uphill struggle or not. And so since you brought up the idea of perseverance, I'd actually like to cite another example. So Peter Diamandis, who's one of my role models, so he's the co-founder, he's a serial entrepreneur, he's co-founded the X Prize, co-founded Singularity University, the International Space University, and Zero G Adventures. So he's so passionate about space, he said, why can't we just start sending people to space? So he said, well, let's found a company around this. He founded Zero G Adventures, and they offer different space packages. They're the ones that celebrities pay $20 million to, and they go to the International Space Station. Or you can pay $5,000 and go on a parabolic flight. And of course, when you ran this by the FAA, they weren't so thrilled about something that was not even remotely close to what they're used to dealing with. His journey, if you ever hear him tell it, was an 11-year startup. 11 years to merely get a company off the ground. Now, there's not many investors who would be thrilled about such a prospect. And to be the founder of such a company, you have to have passion, you have to have perseverance. So that's an excellent point. And if you guys have any other pearls to offer, by all means, throw them in. If not, we're nearing the end of our time, I think. Okay. So next time, I've alluded to a workshop. What are we going to do? So it's going to be a lot of you and a little bit less than me. We're going to talk about grand challenges, and not just this idea of grand challenges, but we're going to actually identify grand challenges as they exist locally, globally, and in between. We're going to go through exercises to get rid of our inhibitions. Nothing too crazy, I promise you. But just get those ideas out and stop editing ourselves or censoring ourselves. There's going to be a lot of teamwork, so if you don't like people, now's a good time to learn. We're going to learn about rapid prototyping. If there's time left today, we'll talk about trends and technologies. If not, next workshop is very dedicated to that. We're going to talk about currencies, emerging currencies, because moolah or money isn't the only way in which people trade or exchange value. And I think that's a really important insight to realize. And then we're going to play business plan Mad Libs. So in the course of an hour and a half next time, we're going to create a wild, zany idea and create a business plan around it. Okay? All right, so I've already told you one part of your homework, so it's optional. For one day, take 2 low-tech pieces of equipment, take a writing utensil, take a writing down on utensil, walk around the world as you normally would, ask yourself, what is inefficient, how can it be made better, okay? And then, just so you come a little bit prepared, start thinking about things in the world that, we've come to accept as status quo, that maybe we shouldn't, whether it's poverty, whether it's reliance on fossil fuels, whether it's inadequate nutrition worldwide, or whether it's something a little bit less large scale. Start thinking about those and bring them to class or to the workshop next time. Okay? All right, so to plant some seeds, I want to talk about big ideas now. I was just brainstorming, thinking about things I'd like to see within my lifetime, and I think that is very likely. So ideas I want to throw out there as you go walking out the door today. Who's going to be the first person to walk on Mars? How and when will we achieve our first extraterrestrial settlement? What will it successfully take to reverse engineer the brain? Now, do we actually need biological neurons? Or if we come up with a structure that is exactly alike to the human brain in terms of synaptic connectivity, but is made of something completely different, say metal, is that adequate to replicate the human brain? Will that create a thinking, feeling entity, even though it may not be organic? Who will be the last human being to die? A friend of mine who's very, very passionate about not aging and staying alive forever often laments, we are either going to be the last generation to die or the last generation before that, and the generation after us will never die, which is a little bit sad for us. Is it possible to master 3D printing at the atomic scale? So we talked about this earlier in the class. Now what happens if you mastered slamming together 2 particles of hydrogen with 1 of oxygen, and you could create water at will, and suddenly there's no water scarcity? You could overcome scarcity and no one would have to be resourceless or hungry or homeless again. Okay? And then one of my favorite questions to ask, is there such thing, can neuroplasticity or elective brain surgery or cosmetic neurosurgery, can that be a viable field? Can we say 10 or 15 years from now, you know what, I don't think I have high enough executive functioning capabilities, I'm going to go visit my brain surgeon and ask for more stem cells in my frontal lobe so I can make better decisions. Is that a thing? Who knows? Okay? So these are some of the big ideas that I thought of. I'd love to hear some of yours. Okay? So as I leave you here today, I'm going to leave you with some of the thoughts from thinkers alive and gone who have influenced my manner of thinking. Okay? So always ask fairy tale what if questions. Don't be limited by what people say can and cannot be done. Steve Jobs said, stay hungry, stay foolish. Today's craziness might be tomorrow's breakthrough. Dean Kamen, inventor of the Segway and the insulin pump, said, when embarking upon an idea, ask yourself, is it crazy? The answer should be yes. If it works, will it be a really big deal? Okay? And then George Bernard Shaw, this is paraphrase of what he's long said, look at the world and don't think why, ask why not. Progress does not depend on the reasonable man or the unquestioning individual, but the unreasonable one who dares to ask questions. Okay? So that's about it from me. I would love to hear from you and your thoughts in the time we have left. Yeah, Nolan.
I guess thinking about innovation and that sort of thing, especially coming from the School of Business, where you hear just hundreds and hundreds of horror stories of people who sunk their lives to try and start a business or, create something useful that they can go put in Home Depot shelves or something like that. I guess my question is, like, as far as resources go, I think that's probably one of the biggest drawbacks towards innovation. And, I'm not sure how to frame this question, but I mean, scarce resources, like how do people really get around that, like money and time and networks and stuff?
Yeah, and that's a really, really good point. So if you read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, or you look at the story of any successful person, it goes back to lesson number 5. It comes down to people and having a core group of people around you. It almost comes down to luck, I think, in having supportive family who says, we realize that you should probably get a job right now and make yourself a productive member of society. But you're right, resources and security are a huge consideration. And that's why I think a lot of the time, it's more acceptable when you're in your early 20s, for example, to say, hey, I'm going to quit my job and pursue this garage startup, than when you're 30 and have a kid and have other responsibilities. So it's a good question, and it's something you need to think about, and you need to ask yourself, A, what are the risks involved? What degree of risk am I willing to accept? And then, how can I mitigate those risks? Because you see people from all walks of life doing something incredibly crazy, even though failure and poverty and loss of a home can be realities. If you look at Guy Laliberté, the founder of Cirque du Soleil, the story of how he got Cirque du Soleil off the ground is exactly do or die. He had his last dollars in his pocket. He had to make one last trip down to Los Angeles from Montreal. And, they didn't even have enough money to get back if things didn't go right. And so you have to ask yourself, can it be done another way? And if not, do I believe in this enough to persevere in the face of failure? But you're right, you can't go through life with rose-colored glasses. A good friend of mine put it this way. She says, be surgical about it. And when she says that, she means always have a plan B. And I have some more slides on it that I'll include in next week's presentation, but it's not blindly going into an abyss with some optimism. You have to work hard, put your nose to the grindstone, identify the strengths and the weaknesses and the threats and the opportunities, and educate yourself as much as possible, and then mitigate those risks. And then even then it might be unacceptable to you, and then you have to decide to walk away. So that's a little bit philosophical or maybe a personal journey, but that's kind of what I've seen in my experience. Anyone else? Alrighty, so I think we're 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So I'm happy to leave it at that. I really hope that all of you make it out and bring some friends to the December 4th workshop. It's going to be a fun one. The more the merrier. Things can get a little bit crazy. Everyone always has a good time. So I hope to see you out then.
Yeah, I just want to second that and say that it's really a lot of fun. If you have friends who you think would like to be part of that session, please bring them. And it's not necessary that you work with a team of people that you know. Sometimes it can be a lot of fun working with people you just met that day. So all the various scenarios you can think about of that workshop, they could all work. And please do your best to have a sizable group here. We have in the past sometimes had people in the room who didn't really want to be there, and that still worked. It was very interesting. They were sitting right here, and they were actually coerced. Their boss told them to come. They didn't want to be here. But what are you going to do? Once you're in a room, you sort of become part of the plan anyway. So even that works, but I don't really recommend that we force people to come here. Let's have them come of their own.
I won't force anyone to do anything, I promise.
Right.
I'll stay nice.
Shawna, thank you very, very much for today, and we look forward to December the 4th very much. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim.
By the way, I wanted to say something else.
Bells things too.
You can buy. Just wanted to say something. You can today buy a 3D printer for $999, less than $1,000. Yeah. They're all available online. You can buy them from the U.S. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, go buy your 3D printer. There's also an amazing project on Kickstarter. It came out this spring. I don't know if anyone saw it. It's you can kind of digitize anything. I don't know how to quite describe it, but it's this little circuit board, and you attach it to your computer, and the videos are amazing. They attach the electrodes to bananas, and all of a sudden they programmed a banana to become a keyboard, and you can play the bananas and have a piano. Or they draw a Nintendo controller on a piece of paper and then attach it to the computer, and then they just push the joystick and they're playing Mario all of a sudden. So there's some weird and wonderful things out there. If you have some extra time, go to thisiswhyimbroke.com, one of my favorite sites, good time waster, and buy a hovercraft or something like that.
Okay, thank you.